Her father sold the Amish girl for being barren, until a poor mountain man with twins chose her. On a dusty afternoon, in front of the whole town, a young woman is cast aside like broken goods. The church bell tolls, boots scrape the boardwalk, and her own father shouts that she's worthless. But then, a widowed mountain man steps forward. His coat is worn, his pockets nearly empty. Yet he places the last of his coins down, not for a servant, but for a mother his children desperately need. What begins as shame turns into hope, a quilted home, a warm fire, 2 children clinging to her skirts. But out in the dark, a powerful rancher marks them for ruin, claiming the land beneath their feet. And hidden inside an old Bible lies a truth that could save them, or destroy them all. Will this barren girl, sold and forgotten, become the heart of a family? Or will the forces of greed and pride tear it away before it begins? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The autumn sun blazed high over the Colorado rail town's market square. Dust swirled between wagons and market stalls as townspeople hustled about their business. The clip-clop of hooves and rattle of wagon wheels filled the air, mixing with the distant whistle of an approaching train. Ephraim Yoder's weathered boots creaked as he climbed onto his wagon bed. His stern face showed no trace of fatherly warmth as he gazed down at his daughter Miriam, who stood quietly in her plain dress and bonnet. The crowd gathered closer, sensing something unusual about to unfold. "Hear ya," Ephraim called out, his voice cutting through the market day bustle. "I offer up my widowed daughter for hire as burdensome stock." His words fell like stones in still water. "She's proved barren these 3 years past, but she works clean and quiet." Miriam's cheeks flushed pink, but she kept her eyes steady on the dusty ground. Her hands, folded at her waist, trembled slightly beneath her apron. Sheriff McKittrick shifted uneasily at the edge of the crowd, his badge catching the noon light. His weathered face creased with concern as he watched the scene unfold. This wasn't illegal, strictly speaking, but it sat wrong in his gut. "Brother Yoder," Reverend Josiah Hale's gentle voice rose from the crowd. The circuit preacher stepped forward, his Bible clutched to his chest. "Surely there's no need for such public measures. The Lord calls us to mercy." "The Lord calls us to be fruitful," Ephraim answered sharply. "She's failed in that calling." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking away in discomfort. A few women whispered behind raised hands. Then came the sound of steady footsteps through the dust. The crowd parted as Noel Boone approached the wagon. His clothes were trail-worn, his beard untrimmed, but his eyes were clear and calm as summer sky. He removed his battered hat, revealing sun-bleached hair, and held it respectfully in work-hardened hands. "I'll take her in," he said simply. His voice was quiet but carried across the suddenly silent square. More whispers rippled through the crowd. Miriam raised her eyes for the first time, studying the stranger's face. "You have means to pay," Ephraim demanded, looking down at Noel's patched coat with obvious disdain. Noel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. The coins he counted out weren't many, but they were honest tender. "I can offer fair shelter and decent work," he said, meeting Ephraim's cold stare. "My twins need kindness in their lives." "Twins?" someone in the crowd muttered. "Those poor motherless children up by Beaver Creek ... "Why would you want a barren woman?" Ephraim pressed, though he eyed the coins with interest. "Because children need love more than blood," Noel answered quietly. He turned to Miriam, holding out his calloused hand. "The choice is yours, ma'am." Miriam looked at that offered hand for a long moment. Then she lifted her chin, a spark of something like hope flickering in her eyes. "If I may have a moment to pray?" Noel nodded, letting his hand drop respectfully to his side. Miriam closed her eyes, her lips moving silently. The crowd waited, holding their breath. When she opened her eyes again, there was a new steadiness in her voice. "Father," she said, turning to Ephraim, "I choose to leave with this man." "So be it," Ephraim grunted, snatching up Noel's coins. "Your mother's quilt goes with you, and your trunk, nothing more." Reverend Hale stepped forward to help, as Noel loaded Miriam's few possessions into his wagon. The trunk wasn't heavy, just clothes and a few books. The quilt, carefully folded, was placed beside sacks of oats and other market goods. Noel had 2 wagons, one hitched behind the other, loaded with supplies for the journey home. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the square, Noel helped Miriam up onto the wagon seat. She settled her skirts, clutching her small Bible in her lap. Without a backward glance at her father, she began to hum softly, an old hymn that spoke of God's guidance through dark valleys. They rolled out of town as dusk was falling, the second wagon trailing behind them. The town's early lamps were being lit, their glow blurring in Miriam's tears as she watched them recede. But these weren't tears of sorrow. They held something like relief, something like possibility. The mountain air grew cooler as they traveled, and the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. When they reached a creek ford, Noel drew the wagons to a halt. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, jumping down to help with the horses. "There's good water and grass." Miriam nodded, accepting his help down from the wagon. While Noel tended to the horses, she spread her mother's quilt on a patch of grass near the creek. From his supplies, Noel produced a loaf of bread and some apples, sharing them without ceremony. They sat beneath the pale evening sky, the sound of the creek mingling with the horses' quiet movements. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. The bread was fresh, the apples crisp and sweet. It was a simple meal, but to Miriam, it tasted of freedom. "The twins," she finally said, her voice soft in the gathering dark. "Tell me about them." "Caleb and Cora," Noel replied, his voice warming with obvious love. 6 years old, full of questions and dreams, like all children their age. Their mother, Ruth, passed 2 winters ago. Miriam nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Children need a mother's heart," she said quietly. "They do," Noel agreed. "And a mother's heart isn't measured by whether it's born children, but by how much love it holds." Miriam's hands stilled in her lap, and she looked at him with surprise at such wisdom from a rough mountain man. The creek burbled beside them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. The air was crisp with autumn and possibility. The simple camp, the shared meal, the quiet conversation, it wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but for now, under the star-scattered sky, there was peace in the choice that had been made, in the quiet dignity of 2 souls reaching toward hope. The pale light of false dawn painted the sky in hushed grays and lavenders. Miriam folded her mother's quilt with careful hands while Noel hitched the horses. The creek burbled softly beside their camp, its voice mingling with the gentle jingling of harness bells. "Best get an early start," Noel said, helping Miriam onto the wagon seat. "Road gets steeper from here." The wheels creaked as they began their ascent into the mountains. The rutted road wound upward through stands of pine and aspen, their second wagon trailing steadily behind. Morning mist clung to the valley below, and the air grew crisp with altitude. "Ruth loved these mountains," Noel said quietly, after they'd traveled a while. His hands were steady on the reins as he spoke of his late wife. "She'd gather wildflowers in summer, dry them for winter brewing. Taught the twins their letters using the Bible on my mother's lap desk." Miriam listened, noting the gentle way he spoke of Ruth. "When did she pass?" "Last winter." Noel's voice grew softer. "Fever took her quick. The twins were poorly too, but they pulled through." He cleared his throat. "Ruth would have wanted them to have a mother's care again." The sun climbed higher as they continued upward. Near mid-morning, they crested a rise, and Noel drew the horses to a halt. "Home," he said simply. Before them sat a snug log cabin, its sturdy walls weathered to a soft gray. A ring of golden aspens surrounded it, their leaves dancing in the mountain breeze. To one side stood a lean-to stacked with split wood, and beyond that, a small barn with soot-darkened walls spoke of some past fire. Before Noel could help her down, the cabin door burst open. Two small figures rushed out, their bare feet kicking up dust as they ran toward the wagon. Miriam's heart quickened at the sight of them. A boy and girl, mirror images with sun-bleached hair and bright eyes. The boy clutched a wooden horse, lovingly worn smooth by small hands. "Pa!" they called in unison, skidding to a stop as they noticed Miriam. Their eyes went wide with curiosity. Noel swung down from the wagon, scooping both children into a quick embrace before setting them back on their feet. "Caleb, Cora, this here's Miss Miriam. She's come to help care for our home." Miriam climbed down carefully and knelt to meet them at eye level. "I'm pleased to meet you both," she said warmly, but without pressure. "Your pa's told me what fine children you are." Cora edged closer, studying Miriam's face. "Are you going to be our new ma?" "I'm Miriam," she answered gently, "and I'd like to be your friend first, if you'll let me." She looked at the wooden horse in Caleb's hands. "That's fine carving work. Did your pa make it?" Caleb nodded, pride overtaking his shyness. "Pa makes the best horses. Want to see the others?" "I'd like that very much," Miriam said. "But first, might I wash up and perhaps bake something? If there's flour to spare?" "Flour bin's nearly full," Noel said. "Market day was good to us." Miriam stood and smoothed her skirts. "Then perhaps the twins would like to help me set things to rights." The children nodded eagerly. While Noel unloaded the wagons, Miriam took stock of the cabin's interior. It was plain but sound, with a stone fireplace and worn plank floors that needed sweeping. She found a broom in the corner and showed the twins how to work together, Caleb sweeping while Cora held the dustpan. She hauled water from the pump and set it to heat, then taught them how to lay a proper table. Forks on the left, spoons and knives on the right, cups turned upward. Their small hands arranged everything carefully, proud to be helping. By supper time, the cabin smelled of fresh bread and stewed beans with salt pork. The table was set neat as any Sunday dinner, with a small bunch of late wildflowers the twins had gathered in an old jar at the center. When they gathered to eat, Noel bowed his head as usual. But this time, Miriam's quiet voice filled the silence with prayer. "Lord, we thank Thee for this food, for shelter, and for new beginnings. Bless this home and those within it. Amen." "Amen," the twins echoed, and even Noel's deep voice joined in. After the dishes were washed and dried, Miriam settled in a chair by the fireplace. She'd noticed Caleb's shirt needed mending, and her fingers moved swift and sure with needle and thread. Cora watched, fascinated by the tiny stitches. "Would you like a dress for your doll?" Miriam asked, noting the well-loved rag doll tucked in Cora's apron pocket. The little girl's eyes lit up. Could she really have one? Of course. Miriam reached into her sewing basket and pulled out a clean piece of petticoat hem she'd saved for just such a purpose. Soon she was showing Cora how to measure and pin the tiny garment. Noel watched from his chair by the fire, whittling a new toy as the twins clustered around Miriam's knees. The lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, and peace settled over the cabin like a comfortable blanket. When the children's eyes grew heavy, Noel showed Miriam to a small room off the main living area. "Was Ruth's sewing room," he said quietly. "Got a narrow bed and some shelves. It's yours if you'll have it." Miriam looked around the small space. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, and curtains Ruth had sewn still hung at the window. It was a room that had known love and industry. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll care for it well." The twins begged for a story before bed, so Miriam sat on the edge of their shared bed and told them about David and Goliath, how courage comes in all sizes. As they drifted toward sleep, she hummed an old hymn her mother had sung to her. "Miss Miriam," Cora murmured sleepily, "will you tell us another story tomorrow?" "Of course, little one. But first, your pa says we're to drive to town early. We need proper supplies and—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We need to see the preacher, so everything's done right and proper." "Like a wedding?" Caleb asked, yawning. "Like making sure I have the right to care for you both," Miriam answered softly. "Now sleep, dear ones." She tucked the quilts around them and returned to the main room, where Noel sat mending harness by the fire. The flames painted shadows across his weathered face as he looked up at her. "They took to you quick," he said quietly. "They're good children," Miriam replied, settling in the other chair with her mending. "They miss their mother." "Aye," Noel nodded. "And they need one, proper and legal-like. That's why we'll see Reverend Hale tomorrow. Make everything right before God and man." Miriam's needle flashed in the firelight as she considered his words. This wasn't love, not yet, but it was respect and need, and maybe something that could grow into more. For now, it was enough that 2 children needed mothering, and she had a mother's heart to give. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the darkness outside, a whippoorwill called. Tomorrow would bring what it would, but tonight, in this cabin high in the Colorado mountains, peace reigned and hope had found a home. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Noel and Miriam hitched the wagon. The twins, bundled against the morning chill, bounced on the back bench, eager for the trip to town. Miriam had packed a simple lunch of bread and dried apples, knowing the journey would take hours. The road down was treacherous in places. Miriam gripped the seat as the wagon wheels navigated around washouts where spring rains had carved deep gullies. Near a bend in the creek, a massive cottonwood lay across their path, its roots torn from the bank. "Whoa there," Noel called to the horses, setting the brake. He reached beneath the seat for his axe, its blade gleaming in the morning light. "Might take a spell to clear this." While Noel worked, Miriam spread a blanket in the shade for the children. They watched their father swing the axe in steady rhythm, chips of wood flying with each stroke. An hour passed before the path was clear enough to continue. The sun stood high when they finally rolled into town. Miriam felt the stairs and heard the whispers following their wagon down the dusty street. She held her head high, remembering she was here by choice now, not shame. At the mercantile, Mrs. Talbot's stern face greeted them from behind the counter. But when Cora shyly showed off her doll wearing the new dress Miriam had made, the shopkeeper's expression softened. "Well now, that's mighty fine stitching," Mrs. Talbot said, adjusting her spectacles to examine the tiny garment. "Your ma must have steady hands." "Miss Miriam made it," Cora announced proudly. "She's teaching me to sew too." Miriam withdrew a small notebook and pencil from her pocket as she began selecting supplies. Her neat handwriting filled the page. Flour, beans, coffee, sugar, lamp oil, needles, thread. Each item carefully noted with its price, a habit from her years of careful housekeeping. "You keep good accounts," Mrs. Talbot observed, watching Miriam's methodical shopping. "A careful home needs careful records," Miriam replied quietly, adding up the column of figures. They were loading their purchases when Reverend Hale approached them on the boardwalk, his kind face creased with welcome. "Miss Yoder, or should I say Mrs. Boone now, it does my heart good to see you settled." "Just Miriam, for now, Reverend," she answered carefully. "We're still finding our way." "You showed rare courage that day," he said, his voice gentle. "We'd be blessed to have you join us for Sunday service. The children, too, of course." Before Noel could respond, Sheriff McKittrick emerged from his office, beckoning him aside. Miriam watched their heads bend close in conversation, noting the tight line of Noel's jaw as the lawman spoke. "Silas Whitcomb's been asking questions," she heard McKittrick say in a low voice. "Wanting to know who's staying up at the Boone place, That man has his eye on every acre that borders his range." "We aim to live peaceably," Noel replied, his voice steady but quiet. A shadow fell across the boardwalk. A man in worn leather chaps stood nearby. Red Malloy, Whitcomb's foreman. His hard eyes fixed on Noel as he spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed too close to Noel's boot to be accidental. Miriam saw Noel's hands tighten on the wagon rail, but his voice remained calm. "Afternoon, Malloy." The foreman's only response was another contemptuous spit before he moved on. They were nearly finished loading when a boy on a bicycle came pedaling frantically down the street. "Mr. Boone! Mr. Boone!" he called out, waving a yellow telegram envelope. "Got a message here. Was supposed to go to the Whitcomb Ranch, but the address got smudged." Noel took the envelope, his expression grave as he read the brief message inside. Miriam caught a glimpse of the words before he carefully refolded it. "Papers filed, stop North Quarter section, secured, stop, proceed with fencing, stop." "This isn't meant for me," Noel said firmly, handing it back to the boy. "Best take it straight to the telegraph office and have them redirect it proper." The boy nodded and pedaled away, but the warning was clear enough. Whitcomb was moving to surround their homestead, piece by piece. The journey home seemed longer, each of them lost in thought as the wagon climbed back into the mountains. The twins, tired from their adventure, dozed against Miriam's skirts while she watched the lengthening shadows of late afternoon stretch across the valley below. Dusk was settling when they finally reached the cabin. While Miriam put away supplies and began kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, Noel took a lantern and went to walk the fence lines. The twins helped her in the kitchen, their small hands forming little loaves alongside her larger ones. Through the window, she could see Noel's lantern moving along the property boundaries, checking each post and rail. The light swung back and forth like a pendulum marking time they might not have much of if Whitcomb had his way. "Pa says we need to look at Mama Ruth's papers tomorrow," Caleb said suddenly, dusting flour from his hands. "Is that because of the mean man in town?" Miriam's hands stilled in the dough. "It's because your pa wants everything to be right and proper," she answered carefully. "Sometimes papers are important for proving what belongs to whom." "Do you belong to us now?" Cora asked, her small face serious in the lamplight. Miriam's heart squeezed at the innocent question. "I'm here to help care for you," she said gently. "And tomorrow we'll make sure everything's proper and legal, just as your pa says." Outside, Noel's lantern continued its steady journey around their boundaries, a small light holding back the gathering dark. Tomorrow they would sort through Ruth's papers, seeking the proof that this land, this home, was truly theirs to defend. The mountain air bit sharp and clean as Miriam rose before sunrise. Her small room, warmed only by Ruth's faded quilt, reminded her that winter would come soon to these heights. She dressed quickly, wrapping her shawl tight against. The chill. In the main room, she stirred the banked coals and added kindling until flames licked upward. The cabin's wooden floors, dulled by tracked-in dirt, caught her eye. Miriam mixed lye soap with hot water in a bucket, gathered clean rags, and set to scrubbing on her hands and knees. Through the window, she watched Noel trudging back and forth from the creek, hauling water in wooden buckets that swayed from his yoke. Steam rose from his breath in the cold morning air. The routine felt familiar already, his steady work outside, her careful tending within. The twins tumbled from their bed nook as the sun crested the mountains, their small feet pattering on the clean-swept boards. "Miss Miriam, we're hungry," Caleb announced, while Cora rubbed sleep from her eyes. "Then you're just in time to help," Miriam smiled, setting them up at the table with a bowl of dried beans to shell. She measured flour into a wooden bowl, adding yeast and warm water to proof while she stoked the stove. "Would you like to learn a verse while we work?" she asked, kneading the bread dough with practiced motions. The children nodded eagerly. "The Lord is my shepherd," Miriam began, her voice gentle as she worked the dough. "I shall not want." "I shall not want," the twins echoed, their small fingers busy with the beans. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," she continued. The familiar words brought comfort as she shaped the dough into rounds. When the bread was rising under clean cloths and the beans were shelled, Miriam turned to Noel, who had come in to warm his hands by the stove. "I should like to see Ruth's trunk," she said carefully, "so I may keep accounts proper." Noel nodded, climbing to the loft. He returned with a cedar chest, its wood smooth with age. Setting it gently on the table, he opened the lid. The scent of cedar and lavender rose up with memories not his wife's alone. Inside lay Ruth's gray wool shawl, carefully folded. Beneath it, a family Bible with births and deaths recorded in fading ink. Miriam lifted these reverently aside, finding bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon and a packet of land papers bound in leather. Her fingers, practiced from years of household management, sorted through the documents methodically. A notation caught her eye, an unpaid fee marked in the margin. Further down, she found a penciled reminder in Ruth's hand. "Homestead final proof, come spring." "These need careful reading," Miriam said, setting the papers aside. "After chores, if you please." The afternoon sun was low when Noel took her to walk the back pasture. Golden light slanted through the aspens, their leaves trembling like coins in the mountain breeze. Near the property line, Noel stopped short. A survey stake lay on its side, the earth around. It freshly disturbed. "This was set proper," he said quietly, running his thumb along the splintered wood. "Someone's pulled it clean out." They walked the fence line in silence after that, checking each post and rail. As dusk gathered, they found a folded paper secured to the gate. Noel's hands were steady as he opened it, but Miriam saw his jaw tighten as he read the words. "Whitcomb Grazing and Land, Trespass Claim." "We'll ride to the county seat," he said finally. "File whatever's lacking. Make it all legal and proper." Back in the cabin, the twins sensed the tension in the air. They pressed close to Miriam as she prepared their supper of beans and fresh bread. "Sing for us?" Cora asked in a small voice. "The hymn about God being near?" Miriam's voice rose clear and true in the lamplight. "Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee." The familiar melody seemed to ease something in the room. Even Noel's shoulders relaxed as he cleaned his rifle by the fire. After the children were tucked into their bed, Miriam spread Ruth's papers on the table. The lamp cast yellow light across deeds, receipts, and letters. She pulled out her small notebook and pencil, determined to account for every document before dawn. Noel watched her work for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to do this tonight." "Yes," Miriam said softly, not looking up from her careful notes. "I do." Her pencil moved steadily across the page, recording dates and numbers with quiet precision. The cabin grew still except for the scratch of Miriam's pencil and the soft pop of burning wood in the stove. Outside, a coyote called lonesome across the valley. But inside, Miriam kept working, building a fortress of facts and figures against whatever threat tomorrow might bring. Miriam worked through the night by lamplight, her fingers gentle on the worn papers as she sorted them into neat piles. The flame cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, while she recorded each document in her precise handwriting. A preemption filing from 2 years past, carefully preserved tax receipts, and, most worrying, a notation about a missing final proof note. Ruth's family Bible lay beside the papers, its leather cover smooth with years of handling. A faded ribbon marked the Psalms, and Miriam touched it reverently before setting the Bible aside. It would stay by her bedside, she decided, a source of strength for whatever challenges lay ahead. The first pale light of dawn was creeping through the windows when she finished her inventory. Her back ached from hours of hunching over the documents, but satisfaction warmed her chest at having completed the task. The neat columns of her ledger told a clear story. They needed that final proof, and soon. Noel found her there when he came in from his early chores. "You've been at it all night," he said softly, careful not to wake the twins. "There's much to sort through," Miriam replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "But now we know what we're facing." While Miriam stirred a pot of thick oatmeal, Noel roused the children. They gathered around the table, steam rising from their bowls in the cool morning air. Miriam bowed her head for a quick prayer, thankful for the food and asking for guidance on their journey. "It's a fair distance to the county seat," Noel explained as they cleared the breakfast things. "We'd best get an early start." They worked together to pack the wagon, Miriam wrapping jerky and bread in clean cloths, while Noel checked the harness and wheels. She added blankets for the children and a battered coffee pot, knowing they'd need its warmth on the long road. The twins climbed eagerly into the wagon bed, settling among the supplies. Miriam took her place on the seat beside Noel, her shawl drawn tight against the morning chill. The sun was barely over the mountains when they set out, the wagon wheels creaking familiar rhythms on the rutted road. By midday, they reached a swollen creek, its waters muddied by recent rains. Noel studied the crossing carefully before guiding the team through. Water swirled around the wheels, but the horses kept their footing on the rocky bottom. Miriam held her breath until they reached the far bank, then smiled at the twins' excited chatter about their adventure. The afternoon sun was high when they stopped at a stage station to rest the team. While Noel tended to the horses, Miriam took the children inside, where a clerk confirmed what they hoped to hear. "Land office keeps late hours during claim season," the man said, looking up from his ledger. "Lots of folks coming in to file or prove up these days." Noel nodded his thanks, and they pressed on. As darkness fell, he lit the wagon's lantern, its yellow glow bobbing along the road like a earthbound star. The twins dozed in the back, wrapped snug in blankets, while Miriam kept watch beside him. The county seat's lights finally appeared through the darkness, a welcome sight after the long day's travel. They found the livery stable still open, and Noel arranged care for their tired team. The owner directed them to a nearby boarding house where they might find rooms. "Just the one room left," the boarding house keeper told them, jingling her keys. "Times being busy with land business and all?" Noel paid for the room, and they carried their things up narrow stairs. The twins, sleepy but excited by the adventure, curled up on pallets on the floor. Miriam took a straight-backed chair near the window, maintaining proper distance despite their close quarters. From her post, she could see the street below, where occasional passers-by hurried. Through the darkness. None of them slept deeply that night, the strange sounds of town keeping them alert. When first light touched the windows, they were already dressed and ready. A quick breakfast of jerky and the last of their bread, and they joined the growing queue outside the land office. The morning air was crisp as they waited, watching others clutching their own precious papers. The twins stayed close to Miriam, eyes wide at the bustle of the county seat. When their turn came, they filed into the office where Clerk Ezra Pike sat behind a broad desk. Pike was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He took their papers with practiced hands, scanning quickly through Noel's file. His frown deepened as he reached the end. "Missing the final proof affidavit," he announced, looking up at them. "Can't complete without that." Miriam's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "What must we do?" "I can set an appointment," Pike said, consulting a thick book. 14 days from now, you'll need to bring witnesses who can speak to your improvements on the land. Receipts for materials, too." He dipped his pen and wrote carefully in his ledger. 9 o'clock sharp, October 15th. Miriam copied the date in her own small notebook, adding Pike's name and the requirements he'd listed. Her hand was steady, though inside she felt the pressure of time bearing down on them. They purchased fresh ledger paper and ink before leaving town, Miriam knowing she'd need them to organize their proof. The sun was already westering when they started for home, and Noel found a sheltered spot to make camp when darkness fell. The twins helped gather wood while Miriam set up the coffee pot at the edge of their small fire. The autumn night was clear, stars sharp as ice above them. They sat close to the flames, sharing coffee and the last of their jerky. "Tell us about when you first came here," Miriam asked Noel softly, wondering about the history of the land they were fighting to keep. As Noel spoke of his early days in the territory, his voice low and steady, the twins leaned against Miriam's sides. The fire popped and sparked, sending embers floating up toward the frost-crisp stars, while his words painted pictures of hope and hard work, of building something from nothing but determination and faith. Miriam listened intently, her mind already working on how to prove what this land meant to them all. The 14 days seemed both too long to wait and too short to prepare. But as she gazed up at the vast sky above them, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. They would find a way. They had to. The wagon rolled into their homestead yard by mid-afternoon, dust settling around the wheels. Miriam's bones ached from the long journey, but there was work to be done. While Noel unhitched the team, she led the sleepy twins inside to wash their faces and change into work clothes. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Miriam rose early, determined to make sense of their paperwork before the hearing. She spread Ruth's letters and receipts across the kitchen table, while bread rose in a covered bowl nearby. Taking fresh paper, she began copying dates and amounts in careful columns. "What are you writing, Miss Miriam?" Caleb asked, peering over her shoulder. She smiled and reached for the flour bin. "Come here, both of you. Let me show you something." Spreading flour on the clean table end, she drew letters with her finger. "This is A for apple and B for bread." Cora clapped flour-dusted hands. "Show us more." Through the morning, Miriam taught them the alphabet, one flour dust letter at a time. When they tired of lessons, she set them to sorting receipts by date while she kneaded bread. Their small hands worked carefully, proud to help. Sunday morning brought a flutter of nervousness as they prepared for church. Miriam smoothed the children's hair and straightened their collars before climbing into the wagon. The little white church stood bright against the autumn sky, its bell calling folks to worship. Inside, whispers followed them down the aisle. Some women turned away with pinched faces, but others, like Mrs. Talbot, offered warm smiles. Miriam held her head high, guiding the twins to a pew near the middle. Reverend Hale's resonant voice filled the simple space as he opened his Bible. "Today we speak of God's providence," he began, "how he sets the lonely in families." His eyes met Miriam's briefly as he continued, "Through his grace, empty places are filled." Beside her, Noel shifted in his seat. She glanced over to see tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. Without thinking, she slipped her hand into his. He gripped it tightly, and they stayed that way through the final hymn. After the service, Mrs. Talbot hurried to catch them. "Miriam, that quilt top you showed me yesterday. I'll take it. $20 fair?" Her eyes sparkled. "I know others who'd pay good money for such fine work." "Much obliged," Miriam said softly, relief warming her chest. Every dollar would help secure their claim. Reverend Hale approached as Mrs. Talbot left. "Brother Boone, Sister Miriam," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'll stand witness at your hearing. The Lord's work is plain to see in your home." The ride back was quiet, each lost in thought about the morning's blessings. The twins dozed against Miriam, while Noel guided the horses home through golden afternoon light. Monday brought a new urgency to their preparations. After breakfast, Noel saddled his horse. "I'm riding over to the McBrides," he told Miriam. "They've worked this valley 30 years. Their word on boundary lines carries weight." "We'll manage here," Miriam assured him. She kept the children close as she hung wash on the line, the wet sheets snapping in the mountain breeze. Between loads, she sat in Ruth's rocker, reading her old letters carefully for any mention of land matters. The twins played quietly nearby, building a small fort from sticks and scraps. Watching them, Miriam's heart swelled with fierce protectiveness. This was their home. She wouldn't let anyone take it from them. Noel returned as sunset painted the mountains pink. Over bowls of beans and cornbread, he shared his worries. "Whitcomb's got money, influence with the clerk's office. What if—" "Truth has weight, too," Miriam interrupted, placing her hand over his calloused one. "The Lord sees. We'll show what's right." After the twins were tucked in, they sat by lamplight. Noel whittled a new horse for Caleb, while Miriam pieced another quilt top, her needle flashing silver in the dim light. The quiet industry of their evening felt like a prayer. The fire had burned low when they heard it, hoofbeats on the road, fast and heavy. They stilled, listening as the rider passed without slowing. Just a warning, but message enough. "We should douse the lamp," Noel said quietly, though his hand trembled as he reached for the glass chimney. Miriam nodded, folding her sewing away. Tomorrow would bring new tasks. She'd take the twins to fetch water from the spring while Noel rode fence. But tonight they needed rest. As she banked the fire, she hummed an old hymn, its familiar notes a comfort in the darkness. Dawn painted the mountains in silver light as frost glittered across the meadow grass. Noel pulled his coat collar higher against the morning chill, guiding his horse along the north fence line. His breath clouded in the crisp air as he studied the ground for signs of trespass. Halfway up the slope, he spotted them. Fresh survey stakes driven into his soil, their orange ribbons fluttering like warning flags. Dismounting, he yanked the first stake free and examined the metal tag wired to its top. WGC stood stamped in bold letters, Whitcomb Grazing Company. His jaw tightened as he pocketed the tags and continued along the boundary, pulling each new stake he found. Back at the cabin, Miriam had her hands full. Caleb and Cora pressed their faces against the window glass, watching for their father's return. "What if the bad men come back?" Cora whispered, her small fingers curling into fists. Miriam gently drew them away from the window. "Come help me bake," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The McBrides are coming to help your pa today, and they'll need something good to eat." Soon the cabin filled with the sweet smell of cornbread. Miriam let the children take turns stirring the batter, teaching them an old hymn as they worked. Their high voices joined hers on the chorus, fear forgotten in the comfort of routine. As the sun climbed toward noon, wagon wheels creaked in the yard. The McBrides had arrived, husband, wife, and their lanky teenage son, their wagon loaded with fence wire and tools. Mrs. McBride clutched her Bible in one hand and a covered dish in the other. "Brought some extra hands and the good book," she announced, stepping down. "Reckon we'll need both today." They worked through the afternoon, the men stringing new wire, while Mrs. McBride and Miriam tended a pot of hearty stew. The twins trailed after young Thomas McBride, helping him carry tools and listening wide-eyed to his stories of frontier life. The peaceful industry shattered when hoofbeats thundered up the road. Red Malloy appeared at the fence line, two hard-faced riders flanking him. Dust settled around their horses as they reined to a stop. "This here meadow's been proper leased," Malloy called out, his voice carrying a sneer. "Mr. Whitcomb's got papers saying so." Noel straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. The weight of his single-action revolver hung heavy on his hip, but he left it holstered. "This is my land," he said quietly. "We've worked it these 2 years past." The tension crackled like summer lightning, until hoofbeats approached from the south. Reverend Hale appeared on his sturdy mare, his presence as welcome as rain in drought. "Afternoon, neighbors," the preacher said mildly, dismounting. "Seems we have a disagreement here." Malloy spat into the dirt. "Ain't no disagreement. We got lease papers." "Indeed." Reverend Hale nodded thoughtfully. "But as the law stands, until a patent issues from the land office, it's occupancy and improvements that carry weight. And I see before me a family working their rightful claim with witnesses present." The riders shifted in their saddles, exchanging glances. Malloy's face darkened like a thundercloud. "You'll regret taking sides, preacher," he growled, wheeling his horse around. The riders followed, curses drifting back on the wind. As dusk painted the sky purple, they gathered on the porch to pray. Reverend Hale's strong voice carried their thanks for safety and fellowship to the heavens. The twins knelt between Noel and Miriam, their small hands clasped tight. When the others moved inside for coffee, Miriam held the preacher back. "There's something weighing on my mind," she confided. "I can't shake the feeling that Ruth left something important among her things, something that might help us." Hale's kind eyes studied her face. "Keep your peace," he advised gently, "and keep reading. The Lord often speaks through such quiet promptings." The neighbors departed under a bowl of brilliant stars, wagon wheels creaking into darkness. Miriam stood in the doorway until their lantern light vanished, then turned back to the waiting cabin. Ruth's Bible lay on the table where she'd left it, its pages holding unknown secrets. But when Cora yawned wide enough to catch flies, Miriam set aside her urgency to search it. "Time for bed, little ones," she said softly, gathering them close. There would be time enough to read after they were settled. Leading them to their small room, she tucked warm quilts around their shoulders and smoothed their hair. "Sleep sweet," she whispered, "safe and sound." The week unfolded like pages in a cherished book, each day filled with purpose and quiet joy. Tuesday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for mending fences. Noel worked steadily, replacing rotted posts while Miriam sat at the kitchen table, carefully copying every receipt into a fresh ledger. Her neat handwriting recorded each transaction, building their case post by post, word by word. "Look here," she called to Noel when he came in for water. "I found the original purchase receipt for the fence wire from 2 springs ago." He smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "You've got a good eye for detail, Miriam." Wednesday brought a gentle rain, keeping everyone indoors. Miriam settled into quilting while the twins sat cross-legged on the floor, faces scrunched in concentration as they repeated after her. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Again, she encouraged softly, her needle flashing in and out of the fabric. "Let's make it strong in your hearts." "The Lord is my shepherd," they chanted together, Caleb's voice strong, Cora's sweet and clear. "I shall not want." Thursday's sun found Noel in the lean-to, surrounded by wood shavings. The rhythmic sound of his axe splitting firewood filled the morning air. By afternoon, he'd moved to finer work, his knife carefully shaping pieces of seasoned oak into curved runners and delicate spindles. "What are you making, Pa?" Caleb asked, peering around the door. "A gift," Noel answered, his eyes twinkling, "for someone who deserves thanks." Friday brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Talbot rode up just before noon, her horse's hooves kicking up dust along the path. She carried exciting news. 2 ladies in town had seen Miriam's quilting and wanted pillow shams of their own. "They're offering fair price," Mrs. Talbot said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Said your stitching's the finest they've seen." Miriam's cheeks colored at the praise. "I'm much obliged for the work," she replied, already mentally sorting through her fabric pieces. Saturday morning, Reverend Hale arrived to help them prepare for the hearing. They sat around the kitchen table, going over every detail of their claim. "When did you first break ground?" he asked, making notes in his small book. "Spring of '76, Noel answered. "Put in the first fence posts before the snow flew that fall." "Good," the preacher nodded. "Dates matter, and the creek boundary?" "Runs true north to south," Miriam added, pointing to their hand-drawn map. "We can show the original survey marks." Sunday dawned bright and clear, perfect for the church picnic. Miriam packed a basket with fresh bread and apple preserves, while the twins carefully carried a jar of honey between them. The congregation spread blankets on the grass, sharing food and fellowship under the open sky. Reverend Hale's voice carried across the gathering as he offered thanks. "We're blessed today by those who mother not by womb, but by will," he said, his kind eyes finding Miriam. who open their hearts to love as God loves." "Amen," the congregation responded, and Miriam felt tears prick her eyes as several women smiled warmly in her direction. Noel watched her throughout the afternoon, his heart full. The words of proposal rose in his throat more than once, but he held them back. First the land, he thought. First make sure everything's secure. As evening settled over the cabin, the new rocking chair stood finished in the yard, its smooth oak surfaces catching the last light. Noel carried it carefully onto the porch, positioning it just so. "It's beautiful," Miriam breathed, running her hand along the polished armrest. "Seemed right you should have a proper place to rest," Noel said softly, "after all you do for us." The twins insisted on testing it first, climbing up together and rocking until their eyes grew heavy. Miriam helped carry them to bed, then returned to find Noel still on the porch. "Try it properly now," he suggested, gesturing to the chair. Miriam settled into it, and the runners moved smooth as silk against the wooden boards. Her eyes shone in the gathering dusk as she began to rock, the motion as natural as breathing. They sat in comfortable silence as night draped its soft mantle over the mountains. Stars appeared one by one, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The air grew cool with evening dew. "We should turn in early," Noel said finally. "Long ride to town tomorrow for those witness statements." Miriam nodded, rising reluctantly from the chair. "We'll want to be back before dark." Inside, they moved through their evening routine, checking doors, banking the fire, making sure the twins were tucked in tight. The lamp flame wavered as Noel blew it out, casting the cabin into darkness. Neither of them noticed the shadows that shifted among the cottonwoods, or the glint of watching eyes in the darkness beyond the yard. Monday arrived with a thin wash of starlight, still hanging in the sky. Miriam wrapped a shawl tight against the pre-dawn chill as she helped Noel load the wagon. Their collection of neighbor statements lay carefully bundled in oilcloth, protected from the morning dew. The twins, still yawning, climbed up onto the seat beside her. "Best we get moving," Noel said quietly, checking the harness one last time. Long day ahead. They rolled out as the eastern sky began to pale. The mountain air bit sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and coming autumn. Cora nestled against Miriam's side while Caleb watched the trail ahead, counting fence posts to pass the time. The morning stretched into afternoon as they gathered the last signatures in town. Mrs. McBride's sister added her mark, testifying to the improvements she'd seen on their visits. The blacksmith recalled shoeing Noel's horses 2 springs back, signing his name with coal-stained fingers. Dark clouds began stacking up against the mountains as they turned toward home. The wagon wheels creaked steadily beneath them, marking time with each rotation. They made good progress, though the gathering gloom made the trail harder to follow. "Looks like weather coming," Noel observed, glancing at the heavy sky. They reached the cabin just as the first cool gusts started sweeping down from the peaks. Miriam hustled the twins inside while Noel unhitched the team. The air felt heavy, promising rain by nightfall. "Simple supper tonight," Miriam announced, stirring up the fire and setting a pot of stew to warm. The savory smell of beans and bacon soon filled the small cabin, mixing with the sharp scent of approaching rain. After they'd eaten, Noel went out to secure the wagon and check on the animals one last time. Miriam gathered the dishes, humming softly as she worked. The twins helped dry each plate and cup, carefully setting them in their proper places. When the kitchen was tidy, Miriam settled into the new rocking chair with Ruth's Bible in her lap. The familiar leather binding felt smooth beneath her fingers as she turned to the Book of Psalms. Outside, a lone coyote's yip echoed across the darkening valley. The peaceful moment shattered when Cora suddenly lifted her head, nose wrinkled. "What's that smell?" Miriam paused in her reading, catching the acrid scent of smoke, too strong for just the hearth fire. Noel burst through the door, face grim. "Barn's caught fire," he shouted. "Caleb, fetch the water buckets, quick now!" They rushed outside to find angry flames already climbing the barn's weather-worn boards. The fire cast a hellish glow across the yard, sparks spiraling up into the night sky. Miriam's heart clenched at the sight, but she forced herself to stay calm for the children's sake. "Form a line," she called, positioning the twins between herself and the well. "We'll pass the buckets hand to hand." Noel attacked the flames with a burlap sack soaked in water, beating at the base of the fire. His powerful swings sent showers of sparks flying, but the blaze fought back, growing hotter and higher with each passing minute. A sudden gust of wind carried burning debris toward the haystack. Miriam watched in horror as small flames caught hold of the dry grass. "The hay!" she screamed. "It's spreading!" Noel abandoned the barn wall and raced to the haystack, still wielding his wet burlap. The twins redoubled their efforts with the water buckets, small faces set with determination, despite their obvious fear. Through the roar of the flames, Miriam caught the sound of retreating hoofbeats, 2 horses, riding hard and fast away from their property. They fought the fire with desperate energy, passing buckets until their arms ached and smoke burned their throats. The night air filled with the terrible sounds of crackling timber and their own labored breathing. Just when it seemed the entire barn would be lost, the wind shifted. Working together, they managed to save the cabin and a small corner of the barn structure, but the loft gave way with a thunderous crash, taking their stored tools with it. Finally, the last flames sputtered out, leaving them standing in a haze of smoke and ash. The acrid smell of burnt wood hung heavy in the air. Exhausted beyond words, they sank to their knees in the sooty yard. "Lord," Noel prayed, his voice rough with smoke and emotion, "protect us from evil and guide us to right judgment in these trials." "Amen," Miriam whispered, gathering the twins close. They were covered in soot, but blessedly unharmed. Back inside the cabin, she helped the children wash their faces and change into clean nightclothes. They were too tired and shaken for proper prayers, so she simply held them close by the hearth, breathing in their smoke-tinged scent and thanking God they were safe. Soon, both twins were asleep in her arms, their small faces peaceful despite the night's terror. Dawn arrived in shades of pearl gray, bringing with it the steady clip of approaching hooves. Sheriff McKittrick dismounted in the yard, his expression grim as he surveyed the destruction. He moved carefully through the ashes, studying the ground with experienced eyes. "These tracks," he said, pointing to distinctive horseshoe prints preserved in the soft earth. "I recognize the pattern. Seen the same marks at Whitcomb's north pasture." He pulled out a small notebook and began writing. "I'll file a proper report today, though proving who set the fire." He shook his head slowly. "That's another matter." Noel stood straight despite his exhaustion. "We've got the hearing to think about first. Can't let this stop us from being ready." Miriam watched from the porch as McKittrick rode away, her heart heavy but determined. They would need to salvage what they could from the barn ruins, assess their losses, and somehow press forward with preparing their case. The twins appeared beside her, small hands slipping into hers. "We'll help, Mama," Cora said softly, and Caleb nodded his agreement. Miriam squeezed their hands gently. The morning air still carried the bitter scent of ashes, but beneath it she caught the clean smell of rain. Perhaps the clouds that had threatened yesterday would finally break, washing away some of the destruction's evidence. But the truth of what had happened, and who was responsible, would remain, clear as the tracks Sheriff McKittrick had found in the dirt. Dawn revealed the true extent of the barn fire's destruction. Wisps of smoke still curled from the blackened timbers, dancing against the pale morning sky. The acrid smell of burnt wood hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Miriam stood in the doorway of the cabin, a cup of coffee warming her hands as she watched Noel inspect the damage. The twins stayed close to her skirts, their usual morning chatter subdued. Caleb clutched his wooden horse, its surface now smudged with soot from his fingers. "Best get started," Noel said finally, turning towards them. "There's plenty to sort through before it gets too hot." They worked methodically, moving charred boards and twisted metal aside, searching for anything salvageable. Miriam kept the twins occupied, gathering smaller pieces of unburnt wood that could still serve as kindling. Their small faces were serious as they worked, understanding the gravity of the task even at their young age. By mid-morning, the sound of wagon wheels brought welcome relief. The McBrides arrived first, their wagon loaded with fresh-cut boards and a box of nails. Soon after, the Talbots appeared with more supplies and willing hands. Even Mrs. Peterson, whose arthritis usually kept her close to home, came bearing a basket of fresh bread and stew. "The Lord provides through neighbors," Reverend Hale announced as he dismounted his mare. He had removed his good coat and rolled up his sleeves, ready to work. "Now, let's see what we can do about securing that sound corner." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Men worked together to clear debris, while women organized a makeshift outdoor kitchen to feed the volunteers. The twins darted between groups, carrying tools and messages, proud to be useful. Reverend Hale proved surprisingly skilled with hammer and saw. Under his direction, they managed to board up the remaining sturdy corner of the barn, creating a small but serviceable shelter for essential tools and feed. "It will. Hold until you can rebuild proper," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "The Lord knows we all start small sometimes." Just past noon, as Miriam was helping serve bowls of Mrs. Peterson's stew, she noticed a rider approaching. The man's plain coat and broad-brimmed hat marked him as Amish, though not one she recognized from her father's district. Her heart stuttered as he dismounted and withdrew a letter from his satchel. "For Miriam Yoder," he said formally, holding out the envelope. "From your father, Ephraim Yoder." The gathered neighbors fell silent, watching as Miriam accepted the letter with steady hands. The rider remounted without another word and turned his horse back toward town. Miriam excused herself and stepped into the cabin's quiet interior. The familiar sight of her father's precise handwriting brought a flood of memories, none of them warm. She unfolded the paper carefully, noting how the thick paper crackled with self-importance. The words struck like slaps. "Unlawful arrangement, shame upon our people, immediate return required." Her father's commanding tone rang through every sentence, demanding she abandon her new life and return to the strict confines of the Amish district. The final paragraph carried a clear threat. He would speak against Noel's character at the upcoming hearing, unless she complied. Taking a deep breath, Miriam retrieved her ledger from its shelf. With careful strokes, she copied the entire letter word for word, adding the date and time of delivery. This was no longer about her father's authority over her life. It was evidence of past coercion, proof that she had been treated as property rather than a daughter. "Are you well?" Noel's quiet voice came from the doorway. He had followed her inside, concern evident in his features. "I am now," she answered, closing the ledger. "Though my father threatens to speak against you in court if I don't return to the district." Noel's face darkened with worry. He moved closer, his calloused hands gripping the back of a chair. "If sending you back would keep you safe." The words seemed to pain him. "I'd do it, no matter what it cost me." Before Miriam could respond, the twins burst through the door, faces streaked with tears. They must have overheard, for they threw themselves at her skirts, crying in unison, "Don't go, Mama! Please don't go!" Miriam knelt down, gathering them close. Over their heads, she met Noel's troubled gaze. "I was never safer than here," she said firmly. "With you and the children. This is where I belong." The rest of the afternoon passed in continued work, though Miriam noticed the neighbors' sympathetic glances. Word of Ephraim's letter had spread, adding another layer of concern to their already difficult situation. Yet no one spoke of it directly, respecting her dignity by focusing on the task at hand. As evening approached, the helpers departed one by one, leaving behind promises of prayer and support. Reverend Hale was the last to go, pausing to lay a fatherly hand on Miriam's shoulder. "The Lord sees your heart," he said softly. "Trust in His timing." After a simple supper of leftover stew, Miriam sent the twins to wash up for bed. She could hear their quiet voices mixing with the splash of water as she knelt beside Ruth's cedar trunk. The familiar scent of wood and lavender welcomed her as she lifted the lid. "Lord," she whispered, "I need a sign. Show me the path through this valley." Her hands found Ruth's Bible, its leather binding smooth with years of use. The book naturally fell open to Psalms, where Ruth's silk bookmark still lay. Miriam's fingers traced the worn pages, remembering how many times she had sought comfort in these same verses during her years under her father's roof. But tonight, something held her back from reading. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps something deeper. She carried the Bible to the kitchen table and left it closed, deciding to trust that morning light would bring clearer sight. Noel appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'm riding over to the McBrides," he said quietly. "Need to ask if they'll help escort us to the county seat day after tomorrow. With Whitcomb's men about, I'd feel better having friends along." Miriam nodded, understanding his caution. "Be careful," she said. "The moon's bright enough for riding, but—" "I'll keep my eyes open," he promised. "Lock up tight behind me." She watched from the window as he mounted and rode out, then checked every door and window. The twins were already asleep, curled together in their bed like puppies. Miriam added extra wood to the fire and set filled water buckets by both doors, precautions that had become second nature since the barn burning. The cabin felt eerily quiet as she waited. She tried to occupy herself with mending, but found her thoughts returning to her father's letter. The threats were not idle. She knew Ephraim Yoder well enough to understand he would follow through. His testimony against Noel could damage their case significantly, yet the thought of returning to the district, of submitting again to her father's harsh authority, made her physically ill. She had found something precious here. Not just safety, but purpose and love. The twins needed her. Noel needed her. And she needed them just as much. The sound of hoofbeats brought her to the window again. Noel emerged from the darkness into the yard's moonlit circle. She watched him check the horses and barn remnants before coming inside, his movements deliberate and watchful. "McBrides will ride with us," he reported, hanging. His hat. Said they were already planning to attend the hearing anyway, being witnesses and all. Miriam nodded, relief evident in her features. That's good news. They prepared for bed with careful efficiency, laying out clothes for quick dressing and keeping boots within easy reach. The routine had become familiar since the fire, a constant state of readiness for whatever might come in the night. Noel checked the doors one final time while Miriam banked the fire. They moved quietly, not wanting to wake the children. Outside, an owl called across the valley, its voice carrying clear in the still night air. "Try to rest," Noel said softly as they retired to their separate rooms. "Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Miriam slipped into her small chamber, Ruth's former room. The moonlight streaming through the window cast silver patterns on the floor. Beautiful, despite their troubled circumstances. She knelt beside her bed, offering one final prayer before lying down. Sleep came slowly, her mind turning over the events of the day like worry stones in her palm. Her father's threats tangled with memories of the barn fire, creating uneasy dreams. Yet beneath the anxiety lay a bedrock of certainty. She had chosen rightly in staying. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Noel and the children at her side. The night passed in fitful doses of rest, broken by small sounds that brought them both to alertness. But no riders approached, no flames threatened. By morning, they would need to begin preparations for the journey to the county seat, a journey that would determine not just their claim to the land, but their future as a family. Dawn light had barely touched the mountaintops when Miriam slipped from her bed. The cabin's familiar creaks and settling sounds accompanied her quiet movements as she made her way to the kitchen table where Ruth's Bible waited. Something in her spirit urged a thorough examination of every page, every margin that Ruth's hands had touched. The twins still slept soundly, their small forms curled together like kittens on their shared bed. Noel's soft snores drifted from his room off the main area. In this perfect stillness, Miriam lit a single candle and drew the Bible close. She began at Genesis, carefully turning each page, noting the passages Ruth had marked with pressed flowers or underlined verses. When she reached the Psalms, she slowed her examination, remembering how often the book naturally fell open to these songs of praise and lament. Between Psalms 37 and 40, she felt an unusual stiffness. The pages didn't lie quite flat. Miriam's heart quickened as she gently shook the Bible. A folded packet of papers slipped free, landing softly on the table. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the first document. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in clear black ink, was Ruth's signature on a final proof affidavit. Behind it lay carefully preserved receipts and, most precious of all, a stamped notice acknowledging the completion of all homestead requirements. The land office's official seal stood bold against the yellowed paper. "Oh, Lord," Miriam whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She pressed one hand to her mouth to stifle the sob of relief that threatened to escape. The floor creaked behind her. "Miriam?" Noel's voice was thick with sleep. "Everything all right?" She turned, holding out the papers with shaking hands. "Ruth," she managed to say. "She had filed everything. Look." Noel strode to the door, throwing it open to catch the strengthening morning light. He stood on the porch, reading each page with intense concentration. Miriam followed, watching his expression shift from disbelief to wonder. "The clerk's name," he said hoarsely, pointing to a signature. "Ezra Pike. Same man, same office we visited. These were just misfiled, never sent back to us." He looked up at Miriam, hope blazing in his eyes. "This is everything we need." The twins stirred inside, and Miriam hurried to start breakfast while Noel reread every document. She mixed biscuits with practiced hands, her mind racing with plans. They needed to protect these precious papers, organize everything properly for the hearing. Over breakfast, Noel explained to the children that they'd found something very special of their Mama Ruth's that would help keep their home safe. Caleb and Cora listened solemnly, understanding in their own way the importance of the moment. Throughout the morning, Miriam gathered their evidence with methodical care. The witness statements from neighbors, every receipt they'd organized, Ruth's recovered affidavit, and Sheriff McKittrick's detailed report of the barn burning. She laid each document flat on her bed, arranging them in careful order. Taking up needle and thread, she created a simple but secure cloth cover, stitching the edges with tiny, strong seams. Each paper was secured within, protected from damage or loss. When finished, she slipped the packet beneath her shawl, the weight of it against her side like a shield. The afternoon passed in preparation. They packed tools they could trade in town for barn repairs, knowing they'd need supplies for rebuilding. Miriam filled their traveling basket with bread, dried apples, and jerky. The twins helped sweep the cabin floor and bank the coals in the stove, making everything neat for their absence. As evening approached, hoofbeats announced Reverend Hale's arrival. The preacher dismounted slowly, his kind face serious as he greeted them. "Thought you might appreciate company for tomorrow's journey," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Found something you should see," Noel told him, and they gathered at the kitchen table while Miriam showed him Ruth's papers. Hale studied each document carefully, nodding with growing satisfaction. "Providence," he said finally, looking up at them. "The Lord's timing is perfect, even when we can't see it." Miriam served a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The conversation focused on their plans for the next day. They would ride first to Sheriff McKittrick's office for sworn statements, then proceed to the courthouse. The twins listened quietly, unusually subdued by the gravity in the adults' voices. "Time for bed, little ones," Miriam said when the meal was finished. "We have an early start tomorrow." She tucked them in with extra care, singing their favorite hymn and answering their worried questions with gentle assurance. "God is watching over us," she reminded them, smoothing Cora's hair back from her forehead. "Just like he watched over baby Moses in his basket." After the children fell asleep, the adults continued their preparations. Noel checked the wagons one final time, making sure everything was secured. Reverend Hale would ride alongside them, his presence both protection and witness to whatever might unfold. In her small room, Miriam changed into her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn when she first arrived. She laid out clothes for the twins and packed a small bundle of necessities. Ruth's Bible she placed carefully beside her pillow, where she could touch it in the night. The weight of the document packet beneath her shawl had shifted from burden to blessing. Each paper represented another piece of their defense, proof of their rightful claim to this land. More than that, it felt like Ruth's final gift to them, protection for the family she'd loved, delivered at the moment of greatest need. Miriam knelt beside her bed for evening prayers, gratitude flowing freely from her heart. The moon cast silver patterns through her window, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. Peace settled over her like a familiar quilt, heavy and comforting. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she could rest in the knowledge that they had what they needed. The proof had been here all along, waiting in the pages of Ruth's cherished Bible, between the verses of lament and praise, where she had perhaps hidden them for safekeeping. Miriam slipped beneath her covers, one hand resting on the Bible beside her. Sleep came easily, her dreams untouched by worry for the first time in many nights. God's provision was like a smooth stone in her palm, solid, real, and perfectly fitted to their need. Stars still glittered in the dark sky when Miriam rose from her bed. She moved quietly through the cabin, stoking the banked coals and setting coffee to boil. The twins slumbered peacefully while she packed the last few items they would need for their journey. Outside, frost crunched beneath her boots as she made her way to help Noel with the team. The horses' breath came in white puffs as they hitched them to the wagon. Reverend Hale arrived just as the eastern sky began to lighten, leading his sturdy mare. "Morning blessings," he said softly, touching the brim of his hat. Miriam woke the twins gently, helping them dress in their Sunday best. They ate a simple breakfast of porridge, while the adults sipped strong coffee. The cloth packet containing their precious documents stayed secure beneath Miriam's shawl, close to her heart. The sun was just cresting the mountains when they set out. Noel handled the reins with steady hands, while Miriam kept the twins occupied with quiet games and stories. Reverend Hale rode alongside, his presence a comfort as they made their way down the winding mountain road. At noon, they stopped near a clear stream to water the horses. Miriam spread a clean cloth over a fallen log and shared out pieces of johnny cake she'd baked the day before. The children stretched their legs, skipping stones across the water, while the adults discussed the coming hearing in low voices. "Truth will stand," Reverend Hale reminded them, his weathered face kind. "The Lord's timing in revealing these papers was no accident." The afternoon stretched long as they continued their journey. The twins dozed against Miriam's sides, lulled by the wagon's steady motion. She kept one hand on the document packet, praying silently for strength and wisdom. Dusk was settling over the town when they finally arrived. The streets were quiet as they made their way to the livery stable. The stableman took charge of their team, while Noel secured a room at the boarding house across the street. "Just like our first night," Miriam said softly, as she tucked the twins into their pallets on the floor. Noel nodded, understanding in his eyes. how far they had come since that uncertain evening when he first offered her shelter. None of them slept deeply that night. At first light, they dressed carefully and walked to the sheriff's office. McKittrick was already at his desk, coffee cup in hand. He listened gravely as they explained their purpose. "Seen those Whitcomb boys hanging round your fence line myself," he said, taking up his pen. "And those hoofprints at the barn fire matched their horses' shoes right enough." He signed the official report with a flourish and added his sworn statement about the riders. The courthouse square was already busy when they arrived. Farmers, ranchers, and townspeople moved in and out of the heavy doors. Inside, the benches were filling quickly. Judge Hartwell sat at his high desk, stern and attentive as he worked through the morning's cases. Whitcomb's lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, rose when their case was called. His argument was smooth, practiced. "Mr. Boone is nothing more than a squatter," he declared. "And this woman he's taken in, a dependent, coerced from her proper community. Her presence only serves to muddy the legitimate claims of my client." Miriam sat straight-backed, her face calm despite the insults. The twins pressed close to her sides, their small faces serious. Noel's jaw tightened, but he kept his peace. A stir near the door drew attention. Ephraim Yoder stepped into the courtroom, his hat clutched stiffly in his hands. His stern face showed no softening when he saw Miriam. "I insist my daughter return to our district," he announced, his voice carrying in the hushed room. "She has no business involving herself in English land disputes." Reverend Hale rose slowly, his manner gentle but firm. "If it please the court," he said, "I've known Miriam Yoder these past months." She came to Noel Boone's household of her own free will, seeking honest work and offering maternal care to his children. Her character is beyond reproach, her choice made in full awareness. Judge Hartwell nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Yoder," he said, "approach the bench." Miriam walked forward steadily, drawing the cloth packet from beneath her shawl. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I have something to present." Her fingers were sure as she unwrapped the documents, beginning with Ruth Boone's final proof affidavit. "This was found just days ago," she explained, "hidden between the pages of Ruth Boone's Bible, specifically between Psalms 37 and 40. She held up the Bible, showing the slight ribbon mark still visible in the pages. "Here are the receipts, neighbor statements, and the stamped notice confirming completion of all homestead requirements." The judge examined each paper carefully, paying special attention to the land office seal. He called Clerk Pike forward to verify the ledger entry and signature. "These are genuine," Pike confirmed, adjusting his spectacles. "Filed properly but never returned to the Boones. Must have been misfiled on our end." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Whitcomb's lawyer shuffled his papers, looking less certain. "Your Honor," Miriam continued, "might I ask that the children be permitted to speak briefly?" The judge considered, then nodded. Caleb and Cora came forward, holding hands. They looked tiny before the high bench. "She's our mama," Caleb said clearly, "because God gave her to us." Cora nodded earnestly. "She teaches us verses and makes sure we wash and pray and mind our manners." A softness passed over the courtroom, like a gentle breeze. Even Ephraim Yoder's rigid posture seemed to waver slightly. Judge Hartwell studied the documents once more, then looked up at the assembled faces before him. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony," he announced, "this court rules as follows. Mr. Whitcomb's claim is denied. The Boone homestead is legally recognized, with all improvements and boundaries as recorded in these documents." He turned his attention to Miriam. "As to Mrs. Yoder's status, she is clearly a free adult, capable of choosing her own household. Her presence here has been a blessing to these children and a credit to the community. This court confirms her right to remain with the Boone family as long as she sees fit." The tension in the room broke like a summer storm passing. Miriam felt tears of relief threatening but held them back. The twins pressed against her skirts, their small faces shining. Noel's hand found hers, and squeezed gently. "Court is adjourned," Judge Hartwell declared, bringing down his gavel with a sharp crack. People began filing out, some stopping to offer quiet congratulations. Ephraim Yoder stood for a long moment, then turned and left without a word. Miriam watched him go, peace in her heart despite his rejection. Reverend Hale gathered them together, suggesting they give thanks before heading home. They bowed their heads right there in the emptying courtroom, his weathered voice lifting up words of gratitude for justice served and family preserved. The afternoon sun slanted golden through the high windows, touching each face with light. Miriam held the twins close, feeling the weight of uncertainty finally lift from her shoulders. They were free to be a family now, by law as well as love. The autumn sun warmed their faces as they emerged from the courthouse, casting long shadows across the wooden steps. Miriam drew in a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling lighter than she had in months. The twins danced around her skirts, their faces bright with joy and relief. Sheriff McKittrick stood at the bottom of the steps, watching as Silas Whitcomb mounted his horse. The rancher's face was tight with anger, his movements sharp as he gathered his reins. "Best keep clear of the Boone place from here on," McKittrick called out, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. "Law's been settled proper now." Whitcomb's only response was a curt nod before he spurred his horse, dust rising as he rode away. His lawyer hurried off toward his office, legal papers clutched tight against his chest. Movement near the hitching post drew Miriam's attention. Her father, Ephraim Yoder, stood with several men from their district, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He took a step forward, and Miriam felt Noel move protectively closer to her side. Ephraim's weathered face showed the struggle within him. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "God judge between us." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his fellow church members following in silence. Miriam watched them go, feeling a complex mix of sadness and peace. The break was final now, but she knew in her heart she had chosen rightly. Miriam. She turned at Noel's voice, surprised to find him no longer beside her. Instead, he had moved down one step and turned to face her. As she watched, he slowly lowered himself to one knee on the courthouse steps, his hat held respectfully in his calloused hands. The busy street seemed to fade away as Noel looked up at her, his eyes clear and certain. "Be my wife," he said simply, his voice carrying the same honest strength she had come to trust. "Not for chores or convenience, but for forever." Miriam's heart swelled with joy as she looked at this good man before her. This father who had opened his home and heart to her, this protector who had fought alongside her for their land and future. The twins pressed close, their small faces glowing with hope. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, with all my heart." A warm chuckle from behind them reminded them they weren't alone. Reverend Hale stepped forward, his kind face creased with pleasure. "Well now," he said, "seems to me we've got ourselves a wedding to arrange. The church is empty this evening. No reason to wait, if you're willing." Noel stood, taking Miriam's hand in his. "Willing and eager, Reverend. Then let's set things in motion." Hale waved over a young boy who had been watching from the boardwalk. "Tommy, how'd you like to earn 2 bits running a message to Mrs. Talbot?" The boy nodded eagerly, and soon a hastily written note was on its way to the mercantile owner who had shown such kindness to Miriam. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by the time the sun began to set, the simple one-room church was filling with townspeople. Mrs. Talbot arrived with several other women, carrying pies and coffee pots. The delicious smell of fresh-baked goods soon filled the church basement where long tables had been set up. Someone brought flowers from their garden, and nimble fingers wove them into small bouquets for the twins to carry. Cora and Caleb took their role as flower bearers seriously, practicing their walk down the aisle under Mrs. Talbot's patient guidance. Their faces shone with importance as they carefully scattered wildflower petals along the wooden floor. As the lamps were being lit, Reverend Hale approached Noel with a small wooden box. "I keep these for emergencies," he explained, opening it, to reveal 2 simple gold bands. "They've joined more than one couple who couldn't wait for a proper jeweler's visit. You're welcome to use them until you can get your own." Noel picked up the smaller ring, turning it in the lamplight. "These will do just fine, Reverend." Seems fitting somehow, like Ruth's Bible showing us the way. These rings have their own history of bringing folks together. The ceremony itself was simple, but deeply meaningful. Miriam wore her best dress, freshly pressed by Mrs. Talbot, with a sprig of late-blooming asters in her hair. Noel had cleaned up at the barber's, his usual work clothes replaced by a borrowed Sunday coat that fit well enough across his shoulders. The twins led the way down the aisle, solemn and proud as they scattered their petals. Miriam followed, her heart full as she walked toward Noel, waiting by the altar. The small church was crowded with townspeople, merchants who had helped them, neighbors who had stood witness, even Sheriff McKittrick standing at the back in his best vest. Reverend Hale's words were few but powerful, speaking of love's strength to build new families from broken pieces, of faith's power to guide through darkness to light. When it came time for the vows, Noel's voice was clear and strong, promising to love, honor, and cherish. Miriam's answer rang with equal certainty as she pledged her life and love to this man and his children. The borrowed rings slipped onto their fingers, warm with promise. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Reverend Hale proclaimed, and the small congregation responded with a heartfelt "Amen." After a joyful hymn that filled the church with hope, everyone moved to the basement where the long tables groaned with food brought by caring hands. The twins sat between their new parents, officially a family at last. Reverend Hale stood to offer grace, his prayer touching on their past struggles and future hope. "Lord," he concluded, "bless this rebuilt future you have provided. Guide this family as they grow in love and faith. Let their home be a shelter of peace, their love a testament to your grace. Amen." The evening passed in a warm blur of congratulations, shared food, and quiet joy. When the twins began to yawn, Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house insisted they take her best room for the night. "No sense starting home in the dark," she said firmly. "The children need their rest." So they stayed in town, the twins falling asleep quickly in the comfortable bed, while Miriam and Noel sat by the window, talking softly of their future. The borrowed rings caught the lamplight as their hands clasped, simple circles of gold that represented so much more than metal. With the first light of dawn, they were up and moving, after a hearty breakfast provided. By Mrs. Peterson, they hitched the team to their wagon. Their first stop was the lumber yard, where Miriam proudly paid for boards with money earned from her quilts and the tools Noel had brought to trade. "Reckon we can start rebuilding that barn proper now," Noel said as they loaded the lumber carefully. "Make it stronger than before." Miriam smiled, watching the twins help by carrying small pieces of wood. "Yes," she agreed. "Everything stronger than before." The morning sun climbed higher as they finished securing their load, ready to begin the journey home, not just to a cabin or a piece of land, but to the future they would build together, board by board, day by day, as a family bound by choice and love and faith. Golden afternoon light slanted across the valley as Noel guided the wagon around the final bend toward home. Miriam sat up straighter, and the twins bounced with excitement at the sight before them. Their neighbors, at least a dozen strong, gathered around the barn frame where a fresh roof beam stretched proudly against the autumn sky. "Look, Pa," Caleb pointed. "Mr. McBride's up on the beam." Indeed, John McBride balanced on the new timber, waving his hat in welcome as other men steadied long poles below. Women worked nearby, some tending a cook fire while others sorted wooden shingles into neat piles. Noel pulled the wagon to a halt, his voice rough with emotion. Neighbors sure know how to welcome folks home. As they climbed down, Mrs. McBride hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Boone," she said warmly, embracing Miriam. "We thought you might appreciate a head start on rebuilding." "We're much obliged," Miriam replied, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Please let me put on a pot of stew to thank everyone." "Already started," Mrs. McBride smiled. "Just needs your special touch." The afternoon flowed into evening as the community worked together. Noel joined the men securing the last support posts, while Miriam added dumplings to the simmering pot. The twins darted between groups, proudly showing off their new status as brother and sister to anyone who would listen. When darkness fell, everyone gathered around the outdoor tables to share the hearty stew. Reverend Hale, who had appeared mid-afternoon with his tool belt, offered a prayer of thanksgiving. The meal was filled with warm conversation and plans for completing the barn over the coming days. As the neighbors bid farewell under starlight, Miriam stood beside Noel on the porch, watching lanterns bob away into the darkness. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she murmured, thinking of how far she'd come from that terrible market day. Wednesday dawned clear and cool. The family fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Noel set up his planing. Bench near the barn, the steady scrape of the tool marking time as he smoothed rough-cut boards. The sweet scent of fresh wood shavings filled the air. Miriam moved between cabin and yard, keeping the household accounts in her neat hand while tending to meals and laundry. She had set up her writing desk near the window where she could watch the twins as they worked at their assigned tasks. "Caleb, stack those smaller pieces carefully," she called, noting how the boy adjusted his grip on the kindling. "That's right, just like building a cabin." "Look, Mama." Cora held up a piece of board where she had carefully chalked her letters. "I wrote home." "Beautiful," Miriam praised, her heart warming at the word and the title they now used so naturally. The twins had taken to practicing their letters on smooth scraps of wood, turning even the work of rebuilding into a chance to learn. Thursday brought more progress. The barn walls rose steadily as Noel worked alongside occasional helping hands from neighboring farms. Miriam kept everyone fed with hearty meals, and her ledger showed careful tracking of every nail and board. "The Lord provides," she said that evening as she totaled columns by lamplight. "Between the quilting money and your traded tools, we'll manage the rebuilding just fine." Friday saw the barn's frame nearly complete. The twins had created a small mountain of kindling, proud of their contribution. As the sun set, Miriam called everyone in to wash up for supper. The cabin glowed with warmth and contentment as they shared bread and stew. Saturday morning, they hitched up the wagon for a trip to town. The twins chattered excitedly about seeing Mrs. Talbot again as they bumped along the familiar road. At the Mercantile, Miriam carefully wrote out thank you notes to everyone who had helped, her gratitude flowing onto the pages in graceful script. "Add extra thanks to Mrs. McBride," Cora reminded her. "She brought us cookies 3 times." While Miriam settled the notes with the postmaster, Noel placed their seed order for spring planting. The clerk smiled as he wrote it down, remembering the recent courtroom victory that had secured their right to that future. Sunday dawned bright and clear. The family dressed in their best clothes, the twins taking extra care with their buttons and bows. At the church, they slipped into their usual pew, now feeling more at home than ever among the congregation. Reverend Hale stood to deliver his sermon, opening his Bible to Psalm 37. As he read the familiar words about trusting in the Lord and delighting in his way, knowing smiles passed between those who had witnessed the recent triumph of faith and justice. "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord," Hale read, his voice carrying to every corner, "and he delighteth in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand." Miriam felt Noel's hand squeeze hers gently. They had lived those verses, falling but not being forsaken, upheld by God's grace through their trials. That evening, as they arrived home, the first snow flurries of the season began to dust the air. Tiny white flakes danced in the gathering darkness, settling softly on the new barn roof and the cabin's porch. "Perfect timing," Noel said, lifting something from the wagon bed. "Best bring this inside before the weather turns." Miriam's eyes brightened as she recognized the rocking chair he had carved for her, now complete with a final coat of polish. The twins ran ahead to open the cabin door as Noel carried it inside, placing it in its honored spot near the hearth. The chair's smooth arms gleamed in the lamplight as Miriam settled into it. The twins, already in their nightclothes, climbed up to lean against her shoulders, their faces peaceful in the soft glow. Noel stood behind them, one hand resting gently on Miriam's back as they watched the snow falling outside the window. "Ruth would be pleased," he said softly, breaking their comfortable silence. "She always wanted the children to have a mother's love." Miriam reached up to cover his hand with hers. "She gave them a strong foundation," she replied. "I'm grateful to build on it." They spoke quietly of Ruth then, honoring her memory with stories of her courage and faith. The twins added their own precious memories of their first mother, secure enough in Miriam's love to share them freely. "I used to think my barrenness was a curse," Miriam whispered after a while, feeling the twins' steady breathing as they dozed against her. "But now I see it was really a doorway. The Lord knew these children needed me as much as I needed them." Noel squeezed her shoulder gently in understanding. As the lamp burned low, he stepped outside to make his final check of the barn. The horses nickered softly in greeting, warm and safe in their rebuilt shelter. The fresh timber stood strong against the swirling snow. Returning to the cabin, he bolted the door against the night. Miriam had already settled the twins in their bed. Together they knelt beside their own bed, their prayer of gratitude rising like warmth from their hearts. The future stretched before them, solid as the oak beams above their heads, and warm as the love that filled their home. As they rose from their prayers, the snow continued to fall softly outside, wrapping their restored world in gentle white peace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.